The UK government is keen to attract private sector investment into the road network and is examining the options and models available. Scott Wilson, Associate Director at LeighFisher, is an expert on road pricing and policy, and in this interview discusses the options available to the government. First question up was looking at the current government thinking and what direction the government is heading in terms of road user policy.
Well, at the moment it appears to be interested in commercialising the Highways Agency in order to get more efficiency gains from that and better performance. But it's clear that one of the key issues that it's facing is what's going to be the role of tolling, and it has been wrestling with a proposal for a two-tiered vehicle excise duty whereby everyone would pay a lower rate to use all of the roads and then pay a slightly higher rate to just access the motorways. But that proposal has got a whole host of problems, and it appears that those problems are likely to mean it doesn't proceed. But it is looking at tolling on the basis that it might bring more money and then funding into the network. But that's quite controversial, given that it would mean that in some cases people would pay more than they do now. Now, I think that the big problem the government is facing is trying to structure the sector to attract more private investment in a way that would be cheaper than just getting the government to borrow and spend more money on roads. And part of the reason for that is that no one else has privatised roads without there being a revenue stream from tolling. So there are lots of complexities involved in both restructuring the sector and developing a funding framework and establishing what the role of road user charging is. So I think progress has slowed, but it is slowed for good reasons, because there are a lot of complicated issues to sort out.
The focus today has been looking at the strategic road network. Should the government also look at the reform of the management of local roads as well?
Well, yes, I don't think we would look at energy or water in a way that would say that the large corridors for those utilities should just be reformed and you ignore the last connection to people's homes. It's difficult to see why if you drive on the M40 and then you go onto the A40 that suddenly the incentives and the regulations and how that part of the network is funded should be different from the other. People drive seamlessly on both networks. And also a lot of the difficulties there are with the road network at the moment are on the local road network. It is on local roads that people complain about potholes, and there are just as many congestion and bottleneck issues on local road networks as there are on the strategic network. So I think it's critical for that network to be part of any reform, even if it is seen to be a second stage. Because local road network does raise a lot of complicated issues when you include interactions with pedestrians and issues around property access, but it should be seen as a whole, and there should be a strategy for the whole network.
Looking at the financing of the road network, what options are open to government, and in your view, which options would deliver the government's objectives?
Well, the government is looking to do two things overall, if you look at it fundamentally. One is to improve the performance and the value for money it gets from what it puts into the network now, and then to attract more investment and improve the quality of the network. Now, in order to achieve the first goal, the Highways Agency commercialisation idea would help you go down that path with the strategic network. It would be a more independent structure. And being a more commercial structure, you could set up incentives to enable it to be more innovative and to look at ways of attracting the private sector, whether through PFIs or equity investments even in the network. So that is clearly one path it can go down. If it wants to get more private investment beyond that, it could look at encouraging parts of the highway network to be leased out on a long-term basis in exchange for equity. But it has to deal with the issue of how do you fund that. And I think what's actually more important at this stage is to restructure the sector, commercialise the Highways Agency, and perhaps do the same thing for local roads. Let that bed down and develop that new funding framework and regulatory framework, and allow PFIs to come in, and then look at taking the next big jump to privatisation. There is a lot to do, and I think alongside that, in terms of funding and in terms of tolls, There is the talk about hypothecating existing motoring taxes to provide some certainty of funding, which would also deliver that for the private sector. That's something that certainly should be looked at, but also longer term, looking at whether these the new network utilities, which is what they would be, could establish tolls on existing roads in exchange for some sort of refund of existing motoring taxation in order to meet the Prime Minister's concerns of some revenue neutrality for people. And Oregon has already trialled the technology capable of doing that, so that you may pay for distance where you use the roads, go to the petrol pump and get a refund of, or partial refund of fuel tax. So it's technically possible, but it is complicated, and there are lots of issues to think through. But I think that some sort of path which goes down structural reform, developing a funding framework, developing incentives for private investment, and then having a clear policy on road charging and allowing that to evolve would be the most fruitful way forward.
Scott, very much, thank you.